The research vessel Horizon moved slowly through the dark space near the Deneb system. Dr. Tae Yang sat in his lab, looking at the strange readings on his screen. For 3 days, his instruments had been picking up signals that made no sense. The patterns were too perfect to be natural. Someone or something had built massive structures out here, far from any human colony. Tae Yang sent his findings to Admiral Han Sol at Earth Command. The Admiral read the report twice. In his 58 years, he had fought rebels on Mars and pirates in the outer systems. But this was different. These structures were old, maybe thousands of years old. Humans were not alone in the galaxy. Within hours, everything changed. Space itself seemed to tear open near the horizon. Ships emerged, dozens of them, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls were dark silver, covered in symbols that glowed with purple light. The ships arranged themselves in a perfect circle around Tae Yang's vessel. A message came through on all frequencies. The voice was cold and clear. It spoke perfect English as if it had been studying humans for a long time. The speaker identified himself as High Archon Thelrix of the Velkari Imperium. He explained that humans had entered Velkari territory without permission. This was not acceptable. The Velkari gave humanity an ultimatum. All human colonies beyond Earth's solar system must be abandoned. Humans must accept Velkari rule and pay tribute. They had 72 hours to agree. If they refused, the consequences would be severe. Thelrix said this calmly, as if he was simply stating facts. To him, human resistance was impossible. On Earth, Ambassador Jiwoo was called to an emergency meeting. She had spent her entire career preparing for first contact with alien life. She had studied alien psychology, learned negotiation techniques, and dreamed of the day humans would join a galactic community. But not like this. Not as subjects to be ruled. Jiwoo requested a meeting with the Velkari. She spoke carefully, using diplomatic language. She explained that humans valued peace and wanted to find a solution that worked for everyone. Could they discuss the terms? Perhaps there was a compromise. Thelrix listened politely, then dismissed her words. He told her that 3,000 years ago, the Velkari had conquered their first world. Since then, they had brought order to 200 star systems. Thousands of species lived under Velkari rule. All had submitted. Humans would be no different. Negotiation was pointless because the outcome was already decided. To prove their power, the Velkari destroyed an empty space station near Jupiter. One shot from their weapon turned metal and concrete into glowing gas. The station simply vanished. Admiral Han Sol watched from Earth Command, his jaw tight. The message was clear. Velkari weapons could erase human cities in seconds. The Terran Council met in emergency session. Representatives from every human colony argued about what to do. Some wanted to submit. They had families, children, lives worth preserving. Why fight when fighting meant death? Others, including Han Sol, argued for resistance. If they gave in now, humanity would never be free. Captain Hyjin commanded a colony ship called the Indomitable. She was transporting 3,000 families to New Sol when the Velkari ultimatum arrived. Her 3 children were back on Earth, safe for now. But these families on her ship trusted her to protect them. How could she tell them their new home was no longer theirs? As the deadline approached, reports came in from New Sol. Velkari warships had surrounded the planet. 3 million people lived there, building new lives far from Earth. Now they were trapped. If the Terran Council refused the ultimatum, those people would be hostages. President Kyung-hee faced the hardest decision of her life. She thought about human history. Her ancestors had fought for freedom against kings and emperors. Millions had died in those struggles. Freedom was never given freely. It was always bought with blood and sacrifice. She made her choice. The president addressed both humanity and the Velkari in a broadcast that reached every corner of human space and beyond. She spoke simply and clearly. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting for the right to govern themselves. They had made mistakes and learned from them. They had built a civilization based on freedom and dignity. They would not throw that away because someone stronger told them to. The president's final words were just one word, spoken firmly. No. The Terran Federation would not submit. The colonies would not be abandoned. Humanity refused to negotiate away its freedom. Silence followed. Then Thelrix spoke again. He sounded almost sad. He said that many species had chosen resistance at first. All had eventually submitted. Humans would learn this lesson too, but it would cost them greatly. The 72 hours expired. Admiral Hunsol gave the order. All Terran Defense Fleet ships moved to battle stations. On New Sol, civilians rushed to shelters deep underground. On Earth, families gathered together, knowing that war had come. The first Velkari attack began at dawn on New Sol. Their ships fired from orbit, targeting military bases and communication centers. Human fighters launched from hidden hangars, small and fast, swarming around the larger Velkari vessels. It was like watching insects attack giants. In the first hour, humanity lost 37 ships, but they destroyed 2 Velkari cruisers. Thalrix had expected easy victory. Instead, he found enemies who fought with desperate courage. Humans did not fight for glory or conquest. They fought for survival and freedom. That made them dangerous. Back on the horizon, Dr. Tae Yang watched the battle feeds. His discovery had started this war. He felt guilty until he remembered something his grandmother had told him. Sometimes the right choice is also the hard choice. Humans could live as slaves or die as free people. They had chosen freedom. The war had begun. No one knew how it would end, but everyone understood what they were fighting for. The Velkari had expected humanity to break within days. Instead, the war entered its second week, then its third. Admiral Hunsol studied every battle report looking for patterns. The Velkari were stronger, yes, but they fought like they expected easy victory. Human tactics confused them. Hunsol ordered his fleet to avoid direct confrontation. Human ships hit Velkari supply lines, then vanished before reinforcements arrived. They used asteroids as cover and set traps in debris fields. Velkari ships were powerful, but they moved slowly and predictably. Human pilots took risks that seemed insane. Sometimes those risks paid off. On New Sol, Captain Hai-Jin faced an impossible situation. 3 million civilians were trapped on the planet, surrounded by Velkari warships. The blockade was perfect. Nothing could get through. That's what the Velkari thought anyway. Hai-Jin gathered every available ship. She had cargo vessels, passenger liners, even mining ships. None of them were warships. She sent a message to the civilian leaders on New Sol. Be ready to evacuate. We are coming for you. The plan was desperate. Hai-Jin's fleet would approach from 3 directions at once. Some ships would carry weapons and draw Velkari fire. Others would land and pick up civilians. Many ships would be destroyed. But if even half got through, millions of lives would be saved. The operation began at midnight New Sol time. Hai-Jin led the attack group herself. Her flagship, the Indomitable, charged straight at the Velkari line. Velkari commanders saw her coming and laughed. One ship against their fleet? It was suicide, but Hai-Jin was not alone. 100 ships followed her, appearing from different angles. The Velkari fleet scrambled to respond. While they focused on the attack group, transport ships slipped past the blockade and landed on New Sol. The battle lasted 3 hours. Hai-Jin's ship took heavy damage. Explosions tore through the hull. The bridge filled with smoke. But she kept fighting, giving the transport ships time to load civilians and escape. When the order came to retreat, Hai-Jin counted her losses. 34 ships destroyed. Over 2,000 crew members dead. But 2.8 million civilians escaped. She sat in her damaged captain's chair and wept. Not from sadness, but from exhaustion and relief. The evacuation of New Sol became a symbol of human determination. People across the colonies watched the footage. They saw Captain Hai-Jin refusing to abandon civilians. They saw ordinary cargo pilots flying into danger to save strangers. The Velkari had power, but humans had something stronger. They had the will to protect each other. Not every battle went well. 3 colonies fell to Velkari occupation. Proxima Station, home to 500,000 people, surrendered after a week of bombardment. Tau Ceti Prime fought for 3 days before Velkari ground forces overwhelmed the defenders. At Epsilon Eridani, miners hid in deep tunnels, but eventually hunger forced them to submit. The casualties mounted. 800,000 humans dead in the first month. Families received the dreaded message. Your son died defending Earth. Your daughter was lost when her ship exploded. Your husband sacrificed himself so others could escape. Each loss hurt, but it also strengthened resolve. They could not let those deaths mean nothing. Dr. Tae Yang now worked in a secret military research facility. His job was simple but crucial. Study captured Velkari technology and find weaknesses. He worked 20 hours a day, driven by guilt and purpose. Every discovery might save lives. One night, exhausted and frustrated, Tae Yang made a breakthrough. He was analyzing Velkari battle records when he noticed something strange. Every Velkari victory followed the same pattern. They attacked, the enemy resisted briefly, then surrendered. The longest resistance in Velkari history lasted only 6 weeks. Tae-yang ran to Admiral Han Sol's office with his findings. The Velkari military doctrine has no plan for extended war. They have conquered hundreds of species, but none fought longer than a few weeks. Their entire strategy assumes quick victory. If we can survive the initial assault, they won't know what to do next. Han Sol studied the data. A slow smile crossed his face. We just have to outlast them. Every day we survive makes them weaker and us stronger. Not in firepower, but in experience. They are learning to fight a real war. We already know how. Meanwhile, Ambassador Jiwoo received another message from Archon Thelrix. He offered new terms: surrender now and face only 50 years of servitude before being granted client status. It was the best offer humans would receive. The alternative was complete destruction. The Terran Council debated the offer. 50 years was a long time, but at least people would survive. Some counselors argued for acceptance. Others refused. How could they trust the Velkari to honor their word? How could they tell Captain Hee-jin that her crew died for nothing? Jiwoo asked to address the Velkari High Council directly. Thelrix agreed, curious what this human diplomat would say. Jiwoo stood before the council, surrounded by beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. She spoke calmly but firmly. She showed them records of species they had conquered. She pointed out that none had ever regained independence. Client status was just another word for slavery. The Velkari talked about order and civilization, but they had built their empire on violence and fear. Thelrix listened without emotion. When Jiwoo finished, he explained that the galaxy required order. Strong species led, weak species followed. This was natural law. Mercy to the weak only created chaos. Jiwoo asked one question. What happens when you meet a species that refuses to be weak? A species that fights not for conquest but for freedom? Your entire system assumes everyone will eventually submit. What do you do when someone says no and means it? The transmission ended. Humanity's answer remained the same. No. The Velkari High Council authorized a massive escalation. They committed their 7th Fleet, 40% of their total military power. This was no longer a small colonial war. This was a war for supremacy. As the 7th Fleet prepared to deploy, something unexpected happened. In the occupied territories, whispers spread. Humans had resisted for 2 months. No species had ever lasted that long. If humans could fight the Velkari, maybe the Velkari were not invincible after all. The price of defiance was high, but the cost of submission would have been higher. Humanity chose to pay the price and keep their freedom. Admiral Han Sol knew humanity could not win a fair fight. The Velkari had more ships, better weapons, and thousands of years of military experience, so Han Sol decided not to fight fair. He called his senior officers to a secret meeting and explained his new strategy. We make them pay for every inch of space. We turn every advantage they have into a weakness. The operation was called Prometheus. It was named after the ancient human who stole fire from the gods. Humanity would steal victory from an empire that thought itself divine. Dr. Tae-young worked on the most important weapon of the war. He called it the quantum seed. The device was small, no bigger than a human fist, but when it activated near a Velkari ship using their jump technology, it caused the ship's systems to tear themselves apart. The Velkari's own advanced technology became a death trap. The first test of the quantum seed happened at the Sirius system. A Velkari battle group jumped into the system, expecting to find human cargo ships. Instead, they found a minefield of quantum seeds. As the Velkari ships tried to jump away, the seeds activated. 12 ships exploded in bright flashes of energy. Only one survived to report what happened. The Velkari commanders were shocked. They studied the attack again and again. How had humans developed this weapon so quickly? The answer was simple. Desperation made humans creative. They could not match Velkari power, so they found ways to turn that power against itself. Han Sol authorized another radical tactic. Human engineers stripped weapons and armor from ships and installed artificial intelligence systems. These AI-controlled fighters would ram Velkari capital ships at full speed. It was brutal and efficient. One cheap human fighter could destroy a Velkari cruiser worth 1,000 times more. The psychological impact was enormous. Velkari warriors fought for honor and glory. They expected their enemies to do the same. But human machines had no fear and sought no glory. They simply attacked with cold efficiency. Velkari captains found themselves jumping at shadows, worried that any approaching object might be a bomb. Not all the tactics were technological. Captain He-jin, recovering from her injuries after the new Seoul evacuation, took on a new mission. She began making contact with other species under Velkari rule. She did not ask them to rebel. She simply shared information. How to hide supplies, how to slow production without being caught, how to resist quietly. In the occupied territories, a species called the Rishari began listening to He-jin's broadcasts. The Rishari had been conquered 60 years ago. They remembered freedom, but they had forgotten how to fight for it. He-jin reminded them. She also provided something more valuable. Hope Ambassador Jiwoo worked on the diplomatic front. She sent secret messages to Rishari leaders. Humanity is not fighting for empire. We are fighting for freedom. When we win, we will help you win too. The Rishari were cautious. They had heard promises before, but they had never heard anyone claim they could defeat the Velkari. 3 months into the war, the Velkari 7th Fleet arrived at Earth's solar system. Archon Thelrix commanded the fleet personally. He was tired of human resistance. He would end this war himself, crush Earth, and make an example that would terrify the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The Terran Defense Fleet prepared for humanity's last stand. Admiral Hansol positioned his ships in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Every asteroid became a weapon. Some had engines attached and could be launched at Velkari ships. Others hid human fighters ready to strike from ambush. The belt became a deadly maze. The Battle of Sol began on a Tuesday morning. Thelrix sent a quarter of his fleet into the asteroid belt, confident they would sweep away the human forces. Instead, the Velkari ships found themselves under attack from every direction. Asteroids crashed into their hulls. Hidden missiles struck their engines. Human fighters darted between rocks, firing and vanishing before the Velkari could respond. The battle lasted 6 days. It was the most intense fighting of the war. On Earth, people watched the skies, seeing distant flashes as ships exploded. They knew their fate hung in the balance. If Hansol failed, Earth would be bombarded from orbit. On the 3rd day, Thelrix committed more ships. On the 4th day, he committed even more. By the 5th day, he realized he was losing. Not because the humans were stronger, but because they fought with an intensity he had never encountered. They used every trick, every advantage, every moment of luck. They made the Velkari pay for every meter of space in blood and fire. Admiral Hansol's flagship took critical damage on the 6th day. The bridge exploded, killing half the command crew. Hansol survived, burned and bleeding, and kept giving orders from the medical bay. He refused to leave his ship while the battle continued. On the evening of the 6th day, Archon Thelrix made a decision that shocked his commanders. He ordered a retreat. The Velkari fleet pulled back beyond Mars' orbit. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Velkari fleet had retreated before achieving victory. The cost was terrible. Humanity lost half its remaining warships. Earth's orbital infrastructure was shattered. 23% of the satellites and space stations were destroyed. Tens of thousands of people died, but Earth survived. The solar system remained in human hands. The victory was more than military. It was psychological. Throughout Velkari space, conquered species heard the news. The humans made them retreat. The mighty Velkari fleet ran away. If it could happen once, it could happen again. Thelrix returned to Velkari Prime in disgrace. The High Council questioned his leadership. How could primitive humans defeat the 7th Fleet? Thelrix had no good answer. The truth was simple but unacceptable. Humans fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Dr. Taeyang analyzed the battle results. He estimated that humanity had perhaps 2 more years before resources ran out. They had to end the war before then, either through victory or through negotiation from a position of strength. But retreat was no longer an option. They had come too far and lost too much. In the Rishari home system, young rebels watched footage of the Battle of Sol. They saw humans fighting impossible odds and winning. An old Rishari leader named Da-un gathered her people. She spoke words that would change the galaxy. If they can fight, so can we. The time for waiting is over. The war was spreading. It was no longer just humans versus Velkari. It was becoming something larger. A war for freedom that would shake the foundations of the oldest empire in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Sol. Admiral Hansol changed his strategy again. Defense alone would not win the war. Humanity needed to take the fight to the enemy. He planned a series of raids deep into Velkari territory. The goal was not to conquer, but to create chaos. Make them defend everything, and they could defend nothing. Human strike teams hit supply depots, communication stations, and fuel refineries. They attacked, destroyed their targets, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. The Velkari had to spread their forces across thousands of systems. Every system needed protection. The Empire was too large to defend completely. Dr. Tae Yang developed another breakthrough. He called it the Echo Protocol. Using quantum entanglement, messages could be sent instantly across any distance without the Velkari being able to intercept or trace them. For the first time, resistance groups on different worlds could coordinate their actions. The Echo Protocol spread quickly. Captain Hyojin distributed the technology to rebel cells throughout Velkari space. The Rishari received it. So did a dozen other species who had begun questioning their servitude. Suddenly, the Velkari could no longer monitor every conversation. Their control was slipping. On Velkari Prime, the High Council faced growing problems. Military Commander Velkoth argued for total war. Use the planet-killer weapons. Destroy Earth completely. Make humanity an example that would terrify every species for generations. Show the galaxy what happens to those who resist. Counselor Reshamara disagreed. She represented the merchant class, the beings who actually ran the Empire's economy. The war was becoming too expensive. Resources were being diverted from production to military operations. Conquered worlds were slowing their output. Trade routes were disrupted. The Empire was losing money every day. Archon Thelrix listened to both arguments. He was trapped between two choices, both bad. If he used planet-killer weapons, he would prove humans right. The Velkari were monsters who ruled through terror. But if he tried to negotiate, he would look weak. Other conquered species might rebel if they thought the Empire could be challenged. While the Velkari argued among themselves, something unexpected happened in the Rishari home system. Taeyun, the old rebel leader, launched a coordinated uprising. Resistance cells attacked government buildings, communication centers, and Velkari military bases simultaneously. They had weapons provided by Captain Hyojin, and plans coordinated through the Echo Protocol. The Rishari uprising caught the Velkari completely by surprise. The species had been peaceful for 60 years. The Velkari thought they were broken, content with their servitude. They were wrong. The Rishari remembered freedom. They had just been waiting for the right moment. The rebellion spread across 3 Rishari worlds. Factories stopped production. Workers went on strike. Young Rishari attacked Velkari soldiers with homemade weapons. It was not a military threat. The Rishari had no warships or advanced weapons, but it was a political earthquake. Ambassador Jiwoo traveled secretly to the Rishari system. She met with Daun in a hidden rebel base. The old Rishari female was thin and tired, but her eyes burned with determination. Jiwoo offered a formal alliance. The Terran Federation and the Rishari people would stand together. When humanity won its freedom, the Rishari would win theirs too. Daun accepted immediately. She knew the alliance was mostly symbolic. The Rishari had no fleet to help humanity in battle. But symbols mattered. For the first time, 2 species were formally united against the Velkari. It was a small alliance, but it was a beginning. The Velkari response was brutal. They sent 12 fleets to crush the Rishari uprising. Velkari soldiers went from city to city, arresting rebels and executing leaders. Taeyun went into hiding, coordinating resistance from secret locations. Thousands of Rishari died in the crackdown, but the crackdown took time. 3 months. During those 3 months, the Velkari could not focus on humanity. Admiral Han Sol used the opportunity to reclaim 4 occupied human colonies. The Velkari were stretched too thin. They were learning the hard lesson of empire. You cannot be strong everywhere at once. The Rishari rebellion was eventually suppressed, but at enormous cost. The Velkari destroyed industrial centers and transportation networks. They broke the rebellion's back, but they could not break its spirit. The Rishari went underground, waiting for another chance. And throughout Velkari space, other species watched and learned. On Earth, President Kyung-hee addressed the Terran Federation. She spoke honestly about the war's cost. 3 million dead, 12 colonies destroyed or occupied. The economy strained to its limits, but she also spoke of progress. The Velkari were not invincible. Every month humanity survived made the next month more likely. Dr. Tae Yang compiled a secret report for the Terran Council. He had analyzed centuries of Velkari history using data stolen from their archives. His conclusion was shocking. The Velkari Empire had been in decline for 200 years. They maintained the illusion of strength through propaganda and the absence of serious resistance. The empire was rotting from within. Corruption was widespread. The military took a larger share of resources every year but delivered fewer victories. The economy had not grown in decades. Conquered worlds paid less tribute because they were being exploited to exhaustion. The Velkari were living on past glory. Admiral Han Sol read the report twice. This changes everything. The Velkari are not an unstoppable empire at its peak. They are a declining power desperately trying to look strong. Every battle we force them to fight weakens them more than it weakens us. We do not have to defeat them completely. We just have to make them realize they cannot defeat us. Across Velkari space, whispers spread. 14 different species had seen what happened to the Rishari. They saw the brutal crackdown, but they also saw that the Rishari had fought back. They saw that the Velkari needed 3 months and 12 fleets to restore order. The empire was not as strong as it pretended. Captain Hyojin coordinated with rebel leaders on multiple worlds. She shared tactics and technology. She provided weapons when possible and advice when weapons were not available. Most importantly, she shared hope. You are not alone. Others are resisting too. Together we can win. 1 year into the war, the strategic balance had shifted. Humanity still could not match the Velkari in direct combat. But the war was no longer about direct combat. It was about endurance, creativity, and willpower. In those areas, humans excelled. Thelrix realized with growing horror that he was fighting a different kind of war than he had planned. He had expected to crush a primitive species in weeks. Instead, he was trapped in a grinding conflict with no clear victory in sight. Worse, the longer the war continued, the more his own empire seemed to fracture. The galaxy was watching. Every conquered species saw that resistance was possible. The Velkari Empire had ruled through fear and the belief in inevitable victory. Humanity had shattered that belief. Now others were beginning to wonder. What if we said no too? The war entered its second year with the outcome still uncertain. But one thing was clear. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Rishari uprising had been crushed, but its effects rippled across the galaxy. Within 6 months, 14 different species launched their own independence movements. Each rebellion started small. Workers refusing overtime, students protesting in streets, traders delaying shipments. But small actions added up to a large problem for the Velkari. The Velkari military had been designed to project overwhelming force against a single enemy. Now they faced multiple insurgencies across dozens of systems. Commander Velkoth demanded more resources, more ships, more soldiers. Councillor Reshimara warned that the Empire could not afford it. The debates in the High Council grew heated. Dr. Tae Yang continued analyzing stolen Velkari data. One night he discovered something that made him call Admiral Han Sol immediately. The Empire is collapsing financially. Their economy depends on tribute from conquered worlds. But resistance movements have cut production by 30%. The Velkari are running out of money. Han Sol understood immediately. The Velkari could still win battles, but they were losing the war. Every battle cost resources they could not replace. Every suppressed rebellion drained their economy. They were caught in a trap of their own making. The Empire was too large to abandon, but too large to defend. 1 year into the war, Han Sol launched Operation Starfall. It was the most ambitious human offensive yet. 30 systems were targeted simultaneously. Human forces would attack Velkari outposts, supply stations, and military bases across 1,000 light-years. The Velkari could not respond to every threat at once. Captain Hyojin led one of the largest assault groups. Her target was Velkari Station Omega, a critical logistics hub in the Outer Territories. The station supplied 12 Velkari fleets. If it fell, those fleets would be stranded without ammunition or fuel. Hyojin commanded a combined fleet of human and Rishari ships. The Rishari vessels were old and poorly armed, but their crews fought with fierce determination. They remembered the thousands who died in the failed uprising. This was their chance to strike back. The battle for Station Omega lasted 18 hours. The Velkari defenders fought well, but they were outnumbered and surprised. Hyojin led from the front, her flagship pushing through intense fire to reach the station's main reactor. The Velkari commander saw her coming and tried to ram her ship. Both vessels collided, tearing metal and rupturing hulls. Jin ordered her crew to abandon ship. She stayed on the bridge until the last escape pod launched, then barely made it to her own pod before the ship exploded. She floated in space for 3 hours before a Rishari rescue vessel picked her up. Her flagship was destroyed, but the station had fallen. Across 30 systems, Operation Starfall achieved its objectives. Not every target was destroyed and not every attack succeeded, but the coordinated offensive proved that humanity and its allies could strike anywhere. The Velkari no longer controlled the initiative. They were reacting to human actions instead of dictating terms. Ambassador Jiwoo understood the strategic importance of the victory. She immediately broadcast a message to every inhabited system in Velkari space. The message was simple and powerful. The Velkari can be defeated, not through matching their strength, but through refusing to give up. Every species has the right to freedom. We will help any who wish to claim that right. The message reached billions of beings living under Velkari rule. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others began to hope. A few started to plan. On dozens of worlds, resistance cells formed in secret. They had no weapons and little training, but they had something more important. They had seen the impossible happen. On Velkari Prime, the political situation reached a crisis point. Councillor Reshimara led a growing faction calling for negotiated peace. The war was bankrupting the Empire. Resources were being consumed faster than they could be replaced. If the war continued another year, the Empire's economy would collapse completely. Commander Velkoth opposed any compromise. He argued that retreat now would destroy the Empire's credibility forever. Better to fight to the last ship than to show weakness. He had support among the military, who saw negotiation as surrender. The High Council split into 2 hostile factions. Archon Thelrix found himself powerless to unite his own government. He had ruled the Empire for 40 years, maintaining order through a careful balance of force and politics. But the human war had exposed every weakness in the system. The military wanted war. The merchants wanted peace. The conquered species wanted freedom. Thelrix could not satisfy all 3. While the Velkari argued, the Empire continued to fracture. Production in conquered territories fell to 50% of pre-war levels. Trade routes were disrupted by constant raids. Velkari citizens began questioning whether the Empire was worth defending. Young Velkari refused military service in growing numbers. The foundation was cracking. Dr. Tae Yang compiled another report. He estimated the Empire had 18 months before complete economic collapse. After that, they would not be able to maintain their fleet or pay their soldiers. The war would end not because anyone won militarily, but because the Velkari ran out of resources. Admiral Hansol presented the report to President Kyung-hee. They both understood the implications. Humanity just needed to survive 18 more months. After that, the Velkari would have to negotiate from weakness. But 18 months was a long time. Many more people would die. Many more colonies might be destroyed. The president made her decision. They would continue fighting, but they would also prepare for peace. Jiwoo was authorized to begin drafting terms for a post-war settlement. The terms would be generous but firm. No empire, no tribute. Every species would govern itself. It was not negotiable. Throughout the galaxy, the balance of power continued to shift. The Velkari still had more ships and better weapons, but they were fighting on too many fronts with too few resources. Meanwhile, humanity and its allies grew stronger, not in numbers but in experience and determination. Captain Hae-jin, recovering from her injuries, received a message from Da-yoon. The old Rishari rebel leader thanked her for the weapons and training. More importantly, she thanked her for the hope. You showed us that giants can be wounded. We showed ourselves that we can fight back. Together we will be free. The war was no longer about human survival. It had become something larger. A war for the principle that freedom belongs to all sentient beings, not just the strong. A war that would reshape the galaxy regardless of who won the final battles. Thelrix sat in his private chambers, reading reports of fresh rebellions, economic problems, and military setbacks. For the first time in his long life, he felt old and tired. He had believed the Empire was eternal. The humans had shown him it was not. Nothing was eternal. Everything could fall. The only question was whether he would fall with it. The galaxy trembled, not from fear of Velkari power, but from the realization that power could be challenged. The Age of Empires was ending. A new age was being born in fire and blood, and humans, the species everyone had expected to submit quickly, were leading the way. 18 months after the war began, Archon Thelric sent a secret message to Ambassador Jiwoo. He proposed a meeting, just the two of them, to discuss peace terms. Jiwoo was surprised. The Velkari had never shown interest in negotiation before. She suspected a trap, but agreed to the meeting anyway. They met on a neutral station, each arriving with only a small security detail. Thelrix looked older than his images suggested. He sat across from Jiwoo and spoke without the usual Velkari arrogance. The Empire is dying. We both know this. I am prepared to offer terms that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. The terms were generous by Velkari standards. Humanity could keep all currently held territory. The Imperium would recognize human sovereignty and establish formal borders. In exchange, humans must stop supporting rebellion in Velkari space. They must end the Echo Protocol broadcasts and cease supplying weapons to resistance movements. The war would end with both sides intact. Jiwoo listened carefully. She asked about the 14 species currently in rebellion. What happens to them? Thelrix was honest. They will be suppressed. Order must be restored, but he promised the crackdowns would be less brutal if humans stopped interfering. It was the best offer the rebels would receive. Jiwoo requested time to consult with her government. Thelrix agreed. He gave her 1 week to decide. As they parted, he said something that surprised her. I respect your species. You fight for something you believe in. That is rare in the galaxy, but belief alone cannot defeat reality. Take the peace while it is offered. Back on Earth, the Terran Council debated the offer for 3 days. The arguments were passionate. Many counselors wanted to accept. The war had cost 3 million human lives. 12 colonies were in ruins. The economy was stretched to breaking point. Peace would save human civilization from potential collapse. Others argued against acceptance. Admiral Hansol pointed out that accepting the terms meant abandoning their allies. The Rishari, who had risked everything because humans showed them resistance was possible. The other species who had launched rebellions based on human promises of support. How could humanity betray them now? Ambassador Jiwoo faced the hardest decision of her life. She believed in peace and diplomacy, but she also believed in justice. She requested private meetings with representatives of allied species to hear their views before humanity made its choice. Da-un, the Rishari rebel leader, traveled secretly to Earth. She met Jiwoo in a government building overlooking the ocean. The old Rishari female spoke quietly but firmly. We knew the risks when we began. Many of my people died in the first uprising. More will die in the next one, but we would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Do what is best for humanity. We will understand. But Jiwoo heard something in Da-un's voice. Disappointment, sadness. The Rishari understood practical politics. But they had hoped humans were different. That humans fought for principles, not just for survival. Jiwoo realized that accepting the peace would save humanity, but destroy something more valuable. The belief that freedom mattered more than safety. President Kyung-hee made a bold decision. She announced a referendum. Every adult human would vote on whether to accept the peace terms. It was unprecedented. Most leaders would have made the choice themselves. But Kyung-hee believed this decision belonged to all humanity, not just the government. The debate consumed human society. Families argued over dinner. Friends stopped speaking to each other. News channels discussed the choice endlessly. Those who had lost loved ones in the war often had the strongest opinions, but they did not all agree. Some wanted peace to honor the dead. Others wanted continued fighting to make those deaths meaningful. Captain Hee-jin gave a speech that was broadcast throughout human space. She spoke of the evacuation of New Seoul, of her crew members who died buying time for civilians to escape. She spoke of Da-un and the Rishari who risked everything for freedom. She ended with a simple question. What kind of species do we want to be? One that saves itself or one that stands for something larger? Dr. Taiyang published an analysis showing that the Velkari economy would collapse within months, even if the war ended. The Empire was doomed regardless. Accepting peace now would not save the Velkari. It would only betray the species who believed in human promises. The voting lasted 1 week. Every human colony participated. The turnout was 93%, the highest in Federation history. People understood the stakes. This was not just about war and peace. It was about who humans wanted to be as a species. The results shocked even those who had argued for continued war. 67% voted to reject the peace offer. Two-thirds of humanity chose principle over safety. They voted to continue fighting until every sentient being under Velkari rule could choose their own future. It was idealistic, dangerous, and possibly suicidal. It was also deeply human. Ambassador Jiwoo met with Thelrix again to deliver humanity's response. She spoke clearly without anger or triumph. Humanity cannot accept peace that requires us to abandon others to slavery. We offer you different terms. Dissolve the empire. Grant independence to all conquered species. We will help negotiate the transition and ensure stability. The alternative is continued war until the empire collapses completely. Thelrix sat in silence for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window looking at the stars. You are demanding the end of everything my civilization built. 3,000 years of history. Hundreds of worlds. You ask us to destroy ourselves. Jiwoo stood beside him. We are asking you to transform yourselves. The empire is already dying. You can let it collapse in chaos or you can guide it to a peaceful end. The choice is yours. But humanity will not negotiate our principles. We would rather die free than live as accomplices to tyranny. Thelrix returned to Velkari Prime with humanity's ultimatum. The High Council erupted in fury. Commander Velkoth demanded immediate mobilization for total war. Councillor Reshimara argued that the Empire could not survive such a war. The debate became a shouting match, then nearly a physical fight. Throughout the galaxy, news of the referendum spread. Conquered species learned that humanity had chosen to keep fighting for them. The psychological impact was enormous. Humans had been offered peace and safety. They had rejected it for the sake of strangers on distant worlds. That kind of idealism was rare. It was inspiring. It was dangerous to the Empire. Rebellions erupted on 23 new worlds. The contagion of freedom was spreading. The Velkari could not stop it anymore. Their military was exhausted. Their economy was failing. Their political system was paralyzed by internal conflict. The Empire had been sick for centuries. Humanity had simply exposed the illness for all to see. Archon Thelrix looked at reports of fresh rebellions, economic collapse, and political chaos. He realized with terrible clarity that humanity had already won, not through military victory but through something more powerful. They had shown the galaxy that the Emperor had no clothes, that the mighty Velkari were just another failing empire. The illusion was broken. What remained was only reality, and reality was not kind to empires built on fear. Admiral Hansol knew this was humanity's final gamble. With peace rejected, only two outcomes remained: complete victory or total destruction. He launched Operation Phoenix, named for the mythical bird that rises from ashes. Every human ship, every weapon, every resource was committed to one massive offensive. The goal was not to conquer Velkari Prime. That would be impossible. The goal was to liberate every subjugated species simultaneously, create so much chaos that the Empire could no longer function. Dr. Taeyang's final innovation made this possible. The Liberation Beacon, a quantum broadcast system that could reach every system in Velkari space at once. The message was simple. Rise now, we stand with you. Humanity will fight beside any species that claims its freedom. The beacon activated on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. Within hours, coordinated uprisings began on 200 worlds. The Velkari military faced impossible choices: defend the core systems or suppress the rebellions. They could not do both. Captain Hyejin commanded a fleet unlike any in history. Human ships fought alongside Rishari vessels. Ships from 6 other rebel species joined them. They were not a professional fleet. Many crews had never fought in space before, but they had something the Velkari lacked. They fought for their homes, their families, their future. That made them fearless. On Velkari Prime, the political situation exploded. Commander Velkoth attempted a military coup, claiming Archon Thelrix was too weak to lead. Loyal forces fought coup forces in the streets of the capital. The civil war within the Velkari paralyzed their response to external threats. The Empire did not fall to human weapons. It tore itself apart. The fighting on Velkari Prime lasted 3 weeks. Velkoth commanded the military, but Thelrix controlled the bureaucracy and the intelligence services. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. Meanwhile, their empire burned. Systems declared independence. Colonies stopped paying tribute. Trade networks collapsed. The 3,000-year-old empire disintegrated in months. Councillor Reshimara, seeing the chaos, made her move. She gathered moderate counselors and military officers who opposed both Velkoth and Thelrix. She arrested both leaders and declared herself interim administrator. Her first act was to contact Ambassador Jiwoo. The Empire accepts your terms. We surrender. Captain Hyejin's fleet reached Velkari Prime expecting a final battle. Instead, they found the planet blockading itself. No ships attempted to leave. No weapons fired. A message came from the surface. The Velkari military stands down. We request representatives from all species to negotiate the terms of peace. Jiwoo traveled to Velkari Prime with representatives from 53 species. They met in the High Council chamber, the seat of galactic power for 3 millennia. Reshimara stood before them, no longer arrogant but dignified in defeat. She spoke simply. The Empire is ended. We accept responsibility for crimes committed in its name. We ask for guidance in building something better. The peace negotiations lasted 4 months. Every species had grievances to air, losses to mourn, demands to make. Jiwoo guided the process carefully. The goal was not revenge but justice, not punishment but transformation. Former enemies had to become neighbors. That required patience and wisdom. The final document was called the Coalition Charter. It established basic principles that would govern relations between species. Each species had the right to govern itself. None could claim authority over others. Disputes would be resolved through negotiation, not force. Mutual defense would protect against aggression. It was simple but revolutionary. 53 species signed the charter. Humanity signed not as conquerors but as equals. They took no special privileges, claimed no tribute, demanded no territory beyond what they held before the war. This shocked many species. Winners usually demanded spoils. Humans wanted only the freedom they had fought to defend. Dr. Tae Yang became director of the Coalition Science Initiative. His first project was sharing human technology freely with all member species. The quantum tunneling drive, which had given humanity a strategic advantage, became available to everyone. Knowledge, he believed, should not be hoarded. It should be shared to benefit all. Admiral Hansol retired from military service. In his final speech to the Terran Defense Fleet, he warned against complacency. Freedom is never permanent. Every generation must choose to defend it, not through conquest but through the courage to say no to tyranny. His words became required reading in coalition military academies. Ambassador Jiwoo became the first Secretary General of the Galactic Coalition. She worked from an office on New Sol, the colony that had been blockaded in the war's first days. She chose that location deliberately, to remember where they had been and how far they had come. Captain Hyejin commanded the Coalition Defense Force. It was not an army of conquest, but a shield for peace. Multiple species served together, learning to trust former enemies. Hyejin often said that building peace was harder than winning war. But it was more important. The war had cost humanity 5 million lives. Entire colonies were destroyed. The economy took decades to fully recover. But humanity emerged not as galactic masters, but as symbols of what determination could achieve. They had faced impossible odds and refused to accept defeat. That refusal changed everything. Da Yun, the Rishari rebel leader who had survived the uprising, became her species' ambassador to Earth. At the dedication of the memorial wall, where every being who died fighting for freedom was honored, she spoke about hope. You gave us weapons and technology, but most importantly, you gave us hope, the belief that we could be free. That was your greatest gift. 10 years after the war ended, the coalition had grown to 97 member species. The economic recovery exceeded all predictions. Systems that had been exploited for centuries under Velkari rule now prospered. Trade flourished between equals. Art and science bloomed. Peace, carefully maintained, allowed civilizations to thrive. On Earth, the war became a legend. Children studied it in schools. They learned about Admiral Hansol's strategies and Ambassador Jiwoo's diplomacy. They memorized Dr. Taeyang's innovations and Captain Hyejin's courage. But the most important lesson was simpler. When faced with tyranny, humanity chose freedom. When offered easy peace at the cost of others' liberty, humanity chose justice. The galaxy had changed forever. The age of empires was over. No species would rule others through fear again, not because it was impossible, but because the cost was too high. Humanity had proven that resistance was possible. They had shown that determination could defeat power. They had demonstrated that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The unofficial anthem of the coalition captured humanity's spirit in two simple words. No and never again. No to tyranny. No to subjugation. No to any being who claimed the right to rule others. And never again would the galaxy accept empire as natural law. Archon Thelrix spent his final years under house arrest, writing memoirs that few read. He reflected on his civilization's fall. The Velkari had believed their empire was eternal because they were strong. But strength alone could not defeat an idea, and the idea that all beings deserved freedom was more powerful than any weapon. In the end, humanity did not conquer the Velkari Empire. Humanity simply refused to submit. That refusal, maintained through blood and sacrifice, broke the illusion of invincibility. Once broken, it could never be restored. The empire fell not to force, but to the simple truth that no being has the right to rule another. The galaxy trembled when humans refused negotiation. It trembled again when the empire fell. And it continued to tremble not from fear but from possibility. A new age had begun. An age where freedom was the foundation of civilization. An age where saying no to tyranny was the beginning of everything.